Okay, yesterday we were learning this new Gemara about which really gets us back into the brachas, tractate brachas topics, being moitzi people, having other people in mind. For here, we're talking about for Hallel. The Gemara talks about for brachas Hamazon, and it does open up some area of discussion, which we have touched on in the past. Is a child who is a child who is under bar mitzvah, is he is his mitzvah of chinuch, the mitzvah of educating him, is that a mitzvah on him, or is it a mitzvah on his parents, on his father, or maybe on his mother also? But who's the mitzvah of chinuch on? And that could apply, that does apply to this topic here, because could a child under bar mitzvah fulfill the obligation for his parent? We're talking about one of the cases here was talking about benching. Gemara talked about a case of benching. So the child is obligated rabbinically to bench after a meal. Is the obligation really the child is obligated to bench, or it's really an obligation the parent, it has an obligation to encourage the child to bench? Is it more of a mitzvah on the father, or is it more of a mitzvah on the son? So if it's a mitzvah on the son, then there's room to say that the son might be able to fulfill the obligation for the parent. Why? Because the son is obligated rabbinically, and the parent could also be obligated rabbinically. And if you're obligated to do a mitzvah and your son is obligated to do a mitzvah, so you could have him and he could have you in mind, or you could have him in mind. You could fulfill the obligation for him, or he could fulfill it for you. You're subject to being able to join in this mitzvah. What about if the child is not obligated in chinuch? It's only the parent, the father is obligated in chinuch. So could you have the son bench and have the father in mind? It would seem that the child's benching is not really his mitzvah. He's not really fulfilling a mitzvah of benching. So could he really be moitzi his father and fulfill the obligation for his father if he wasn't really doing the mitzvah? It was really a mitzvah of chinuch, but not that he did. Now, so that's one topic of discussion here, and it's a machlekes rishonim. It's really an argument of the commentaries, the early commentaries on the Gemara, about who is the mitzvah of chinuch upon. And I guess both can be easily understood. On the one hand, it's a mitzvah for the child. We're encouraging the child to do the mitzvahs when they're younger, so that they'll do them when they're older. So you want the child to get familiar with it. So it's a mitzvah for the child. It's also, on the other hand, that the child is not capable of taking on responsibility. So the responsibility maybe should be the parent is more the one responsible to motivate the child to do it. So it's like an obligation on the parent. Can you really obligate a child? So anyway, this is a topic of a discussion among the commentaries, and we've seen in the past, we've seen Rashi and other commentaries say it's an obligation on the parent. There are other sources that say it's an obligation on the child. I think Tosfos might have said that it was an obligation on the child. I think there was a Ramban that said that it was an obligation on the parent. So the Ramban has a big problem in this Gemara, because the Gemara talks about the child fulfilling the obligation for the parent. How is the child fulfilling the obligation for the parent? And therefore, the Ramban learns that the child here is not talking about a child under bar mitzvah. Must be talking about a child over bar mitzvah, because if it's under bar mitzvah, he's not doing a mitzvah when he benches. So if he's not doing a mitzvah when he benches, can't really fulfill the mitzvah for his parent. So when our Gemara talks about benching for your parent, the Ramban learns it means a child that's over bar mitzvah. It's not the right thing. He says it's tavei me'era. Why don't you learn? You should have learned. The parent should know how to bench. But in the concept of benching with other people and having them in mind applies when you have a mezumin, not when you have two people. So the concept of mezumin doesn't kick in because you only have two people, the father and the son. You don't have three people, so you don't have the mezumin concept of having others in mind. And you do, but what you're showing is that you don't know how to bench. Your son is benching. Why is he benching for you? You don't have a mezumin. You don't have this joining together a group of benchers, people benching. So that's the way the Ramban learns. The simple reading of the Gemara is that it's a child, and that's the way Rashi seems to learn, that the child is benching, and here Rashi seems to say he's obligated rabbinically, the child, which contradicts other places in Rashi, which I believe in Tractate Tainus we saw such a Rashi where he seemed to imply like the child is not the one obligated, it's the parent who's obligated. But there are other Rashis that contradict this Rashi here. And commentaries struggle to figure out how do you reconcile Rashi. It seems to be a contradiction. And one way is that even though the child's obligation is really on the parent, but since the child is benching and the parent is obligated in the chinuch, so somehow that allows the parent to be able to fulfill his obligation to bench because the child is somehow benching in a way that the father is obligated with chinuch to have the child bench. That allows somehow the parent to be able to fulfill the obligation of benching. Again, the simple way of learning would be just that the child is obligated in benching, and that's how he could have in mind his parent, his father, for benching. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, with Pidyon of Ben, isn't it that the father should redeem the child, but if for some reason the father doesn't, the child then has an obligation to redeem himself?
Yes, and I think that obligation kicks in when he's bar mitzvah. And it could be the same thing applies to a bris. If the child is not, the parent is obligated to give a bris to his child, but if the parent doesn't, then it kicks in. Then the child is obligated. But again, the point is that by such mitzvahs, right? Who is the obligation on? Would the obligation be? I mean, I don't know if we say there that there's a mitzvah of chinuch. It's really the parent doing it. Those are certain mitzvahs that it's really the parent who's doing. I don't know if you would call it chinuch. It's simply that the child has an obligation to be circumcised, and you have a mitzvah to circumcise your child. But and the child, the obligation the child has to circumcise him. I guess we'd have to look it up how that works, when it kicks in and so on. But yeah, that is the rule, that if a child finds out that he was never didn't have the pidyon haben, the child has a mitzvah to do it. Yeah, I guess we could look up that the rule over there. Okay, in any event, there is another issue over here as well, and that is, so what are you going to have? You have a child be moitzi his father, benching. He's going to fulfill the obligation for his father. Now, if the father is obligated biblically to bench, because it says v'achalta v'savato beirachta, if you eat and you're satisfied, you have to bench. That's what it says in the Torah. And the child is only obligated rabbinically to bench, but biblically he's exempt to bench. So could a child really fulfill even if he's obligated to bench rabbinically, even if you want to learn that way? But could he really fulfill the obligation for his father, who's obligated on a biblical level? So the commentaries understand that no, he can't be obligated to fulfill the obligation for his father, who's obligated on a biblical level, and he's only obligated on a rabbinic level. That doesn't work. So it must be talking about a case where the child is fulfilling the obligation for his father when the father's also on a rabbinic level obligated to benching? What would be an example where the father's not obligated biblically to bench, but he's only obligated rabbinically? What would be such a case where an adult who's he's going to bench, but he's only obligated rabbinically to bench. He's not obligated biblically. And then it would make sense that the child could fulfill the obligation for the adult. What would be such a case?
Yitzchok.
He only eats a kazayas, the size of an olive. He doesn't eat enough to be satisfied. So in such a case, the parent is only obligated on a rabbinic level, not on a biblical level. Therefore, the child could fulfill the obligation for the parent. But really, there's one more problem. And then the problem really is that the child is going to fulfill the obligation for the parent. What level of rabbinic obligation is the child? If the child ate, let's say, a kazayas, he ate an olive size, and he's now obligated on a rabbinic level to fulfill, to be mitzi his father. And we're going to say his father also only ate an olive size. If so, the child's obligation of benching is really a double rabbinic obligation, or it's an indirect rabbinic obligation, maybe you could say, because the child's obligation to bench is based on the fact that an adult in his situation would be obligated to bench. And the rabbi said children should also fulfill the obligations like the adults. But is an adult obligated to bench in that scenario? The child ate an olive size. Would an adult be obligated to bench? No. An adult would be obligated only on a rabbinic level. Okay, so now the rabbi said that children should act as if they're adults, as the rabbis established. So the rabbis made a law of chinuch for this child. You got to bench. You ate an olive size. You have to bench, the rabbi said. Why does he have to bench? So it's a indirect derabanan, or it's a double derabanan. It's one rabbinic law on top of another rabbinic law. And maybe such a scenario, such a case, the child's obligation to bench is not the same. It's not up to par with the father's obligation to bench. The father's obligation to bench is on a rabbinic level. He has to bench as the rabbis established. The child's obligation to bench is a double drabanan. It's a double rabbinic law, meaning it's not just a rabbinic law. Oh, you have a mitzvah to bench as chinuch, and he has a mitzvah to bench because the rabbi said you have to bench. So then you can be mitzi, you can fulfill the obligation for the child, for the adult. No, that's no problem. But here, the child's obligation to bench is not able to fulfill the obligation for the adult, according to some commentaries, because this is called the double drabanan. He's only obligated on a rabbinic level in the first place, and then to say he's a child, he's going to be now obligated as a child has to bench. This would make it into what's called a double drabanan. So according to that problem, you'd have to say that the child ate kedei svia. The child has to eat enough to be satisfied. And therefore, an adult in his shoes, if the child was an adult, he would be obligated on a biblical level. And now that he's obligated on, the rabbi said, you're a child, you have a rabbinic obligation to bench. Oh, now you're one derabanan, you're one rabbinic obligation to bench. It's not two, it's not an indirect derabanan. First you have one rabbinic and then another rabbinic on top of that. No, so the child ate enough to be satisfied. The parent ate enough just to be a kazayas, just an olive size. And now the child who's obligated on a rabbinic level, on one rabbinic level, can now fulfill the obligation for the parent who only ate a kazayas, is only obligated on one rabbinic level. So now we understand how the child could fulfill the obligation for the parent. Okay, now let's go back to the Gemara and the Mishnah. We're gonna read it and learn it inside. Misha, we're on page 38a, and we're at the bottom over there, around 10 lines up from the bottom of the page. The Mishnah. Misha, so we're talking about halal. If a person's has an Eved Isha or Katan reading for him or being mitzi him, trying to help him fulfill his obligation, reading for him the Hallel. So it says, you have to answer after them each word that they say. What they say, you have to say, because they cannot fulfill the obligation for you. They are not obligated. A person who's not obligated cannot fulfill for you your obligation. Why are they not obligated in Hallel? Hallel, they're exempt from. An Eved, an Isha, a Katan, these people are exempt from the obligation of Hallel. It's a mitzvah zeishas man grama. It's a positive commandment. It's dependent on time Hallel, and therefore they would be themselves exempt, so they can't fulfill the obligation for the man, but they could say it and he could repeat after them. So it just says oina acharem. It could say you say the words after them. They're not fulfilling the obligation for him. He's fulfilling the obligation with his own saying the words, but he doesn't know how to read, so they'll read it to him and he'll say it. And some type of curse should come to him because he should learn. He should have learned if he was able to, of course. Obviously, it's talking about a case where it was possible for him to learn, not a case where he was kidnapped or something like that and wasn't never brought up Jewish and never had a chance to catch up in his learning. Obviously, the Mishnah is not judging such a scenario, but it's saying a person is expected to learn how to read. And Tava Loi Me'era, a curse should come to him that his family has to say, or others have to say Hallel for him, to fulfill the obligation. Or if he did learn, why is he having these people who are not obligated, and it's maybe not honorable to be the leader in leading the Hallel. So that is the meaning of Tava Loi Me'era, that a curse should come for such a thing. And don't do this. If there was an adult that was reciting the Hallel for him and for himself and for this other person, so Aina Acharav, he answers after him Hallelujah. He says Hallelujah, and the way we explained it is that he says Hallelujah pretty much on every little mini sentence, every group of words. He basically says Hallelujah. And we mentioned from Rashi says the Gemara talks about a comparison between the way the Yidden sang the Shira by Oz Yashir, where everything they answered Ashira LaHashem. Moshe said Ashira LaHashem, they said Ashira LaHashem, I will sing to Hashem. Then Moshe said Goy Go, they said Ashira LaHashem, and so on and so forth. Everything that Moshe Rabbeinu said, every few words that Moshe said, what did they answer? Ashira LaHashem. So that was the Kegodol Hamakri. What was the term in the Gemara Saita? Kegodol Hamakri Sahalo. That's the example. So that's the way Rashi understands it. That it was actually every few words you would say Hallelujah. Just like Hallo, you say Hallelujah every few words. The Gemara there in Saita talks about the way they said the Shiras. Every few words they said Ashira LaHashem. Oh, Goy Go, Ashira LaHashem. Each sentence each partial sentence that they said, the Yidden said Ashira LaHashem. It seems that maybe Tosfos argues, maybe we'll see on the base, that that maybe it's more of a Rashi Prakim, more that maybe it wasn't every few words, but it was more at the beginning of the paragraph and so on. But Rashi learns that it's every few words, and that's what it means. Hallelujah. After every few words, you say Hallelujah. Okay. Now, makam shenago lichbal yichbal and lifshait yifshait. Place where the custom is to double, you double. Place where it's the custom is to not double, you don't double. You just do simple pashut. One time, you do it one time. That's the term the Gemara uses here. Lifshait means to say it once and without doubling it. So that's what you should do wherever the place that you're in. That's what you should do. And levarech, yivarech, a place where the custom is to say a bracha after Hallel, which we talked a little about yesterday, about the bracha after Hallel. So in case of a place where there is a custom to say the bracha after Hallel, you should also say the bracha. Hakol kaminag haMedina, everything is according to the minhag of the Medina. One of the commentaries mentions that the Gemara often deals with um, or the fact that the Mishnah adds sometimes a general rule. Hakol kamina gamadina. So often the Gemara deals with that and explains what is it adding when it says that. You just said makam, a place where you do it. You should follow the minhag. Place where the minhag is to do this, you should follow the minhag. What is it adding with hakol kamina gamadina? Should always follow that. Everything always follows the Medina, the minhag Medina. Why does the Mishnah conclude with a summary? The Mishnah is meant to be taught in a more serious way. It's not there to make summaries for us. Why is the Mishnah? Mishnah is very concise with its words. So often the Gemara will say a reason. So here, one of the commentaries mentions, why it says Kol Kamina Gamadina. He says because you'll see in the Gemara that Rava actually changed the minhag, and what it's teaching you is that it's mutter, it's permissible if in a place they want to change the minhag, or one of the rabbis feels it should be changed, that you could change the minhag, that you could change that minhag, and that would be acceptable, and people should follow the minhag of the place the way you've changed it to. So that would be an understanding maybe of why it summarizes Hakol Kamina Hamadina. And anyway, we'll see in the Gemara how that, what exactly the story was. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara says Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa, and it's talking over there about benching. Tana Rabbanan Bemes. Yeah. Did someone have a question? No. Bemes Amru. Bemes Amru, in truth they said, and generally this means it's like a halacha no one argues about. Some say it means the halacha l'maisha misinai. It's interesting because we're dealing with a rabbinic law. So what does it mean? A halacha l'maisha misinai. But the halacha l'maisha, they deal with what the commentaries mention. What exactly does this mean? A halacha l'maisha misinai here in this scenario. The Yerushalmi mentions this. Wherever it says be'emes halacha l'maisha misinai. So what does it mean? The way the commentaries want to say is it means that there's a halacha l'maisha misinai, that if the rabbis obligate the child to bench, he could be mitzi the adults if they have in other words, seemingly you don't need the halacha l'maisha misinai. You would say it's the law of being mitzi someone is the concept of arvus. It's the concept of the fact that everyone is responsible for each other, and if you have an obligation to bench, so your friend also has that obligation for you to bench. So he's able to fulfill the obligation for you. So what exactly does it mean that this is a halacha l'maisha misinai? But they mention that if the rabbis obligate children to bench, and especially if you want to say the rabbis, it's a law where the rabbis are obligating. Where does that kick in with the halacha l'maisha misinai, a halacha given to Moshe Tzina? At Sinai, there's no law about this until later when the rabbis established it. And the rabbis came up with this idea that benching, that children have to bench. So it's a rabbinic law. It's an obligation, but it's only rabbinic. How could it be a halacha l'maisha misinai? But so the way they explain it is that the halacha l'maisha misinai was that the rabbis have the rights to add obligations. So if the rabbis come along and say that a child is obligated to bench, he will be able to mitzi an adult who eats a rabbinic measurement. Maybe something along those lines. If you learn that it's a halacha l'maisha misinai. Rashi doesn't really say it's halacha l'maisha. Rashi says it's a halacha, and no one argues. Yerushalmi mentions that it's a halacha l'maisha misinai, and maybe the Rambam seems to also say a halacha l'maisha misinai in his Perish HaMishnayos. He understands it. But the other commentaries say, what do you mean? This is rabbinic. How could you say doesn't really mean a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Even the Yushalmi doesn't mean that. That's the way other commentaries want to say. But anyway, the Gemara says, "Be'emes amru." Gemara brings a brisa that says this is the halacha. Then mevarich love, if a child could bench for his father, and as we explained, he's going to bench for him, and it's going to be a case where the child ate an amount that he's satisfied, and the adult ate only an amount that he's only obligated on a rabbinic level, and therefore the child could be mitzi the adult. And so a child could bench for his father. The eved mevarich l'rabbi, and a servant could bench for his master. The isha mevareches l'bayla, and a woman could bench for her husband. And what about the women? The woman, is she obligated to bench biblically or rabbinically? And this really is a question in the Gemara, because we mentioned yesterday that a woman maybe is not obligated to bench. She's not included in a bris. She's not included in learning Torah, and she also doesn't get a portion in the land. So there's al ha'aretz ha'tova she'enos anloch that she's not part of. There's the al brischa shechosamtu b'v'serenu and al terotzcha shalim aratano. Of course, women are obligated to learn the halachas that they need to know. They have an obligation to know the practical halacha and understand their halachas. But the obligation of learning Torah for the sake of learning Torah itself, that's really an obligation on men. Because of that, there's a Gemara questions if maybe they're not obligated in benching, because benching is the part of the benching is about mentioning the land, al aretz hateva shenasan lach, and it's about the bris, which basically refers to the bris milah, and it talks about Torah. So the Gemara leaves it off as a question. The Rishonim, the early commentaries, of course, argue, and some say, well, a woman is obligated biblically. Others say a woman is obligated rabbinically. Now, if a woman's obligated biblically, so then it's understandable. A woman could be mitzi men. A woman could fulfill the obligation for men, and so could an eved. An eved is a goyish slave. He's obligated just like women. They could be mitzi women, a man to bench, right? Because they're obligated on a biblical level, and the man is obligated on a biblical level. An eved, we're talking about, he went to mikvah. He didn't accept. He did accept the mitzvahs, but he hasn't. He's still an eved. He's still a slave. Being that he's still a slave, his obligation of mitzvahs doesn't kick in, so he's not fully Jewish until he's like an in-between stage. It's brought down. I think the Rambam mentioned such a concept, that he's like in an in-between stage. He left the Goyish stage. He didn't enter the Jewish stage yet. And so in such a case, he's going to be, so if a woman he's only obligated mitzvahs that women are obligated. Woman is obligated biblically, he's going to also be obligated biblically. What about if a woman is obligated only rabbinically? How could she fulfill the obligation for her husband? So you have to say the same thing, that the husband only ate a measurement of bread that's the size of an olive. If the husband ate the size of an olive, then it's understandable that the woman could be mitzi him, because the woman is obligated on a rabbinic level. The man is obligated on a rabbinic level. Again, you'll have to say the same idea, at least according to some commentaries, that the woman had to eat a measurement. She's only obligated rabbinically. And the amount, if she eats only an olive size, that will be like 2 rabbinic laws, that the rabbi said women should bench. And the rabbi said, even if you eat a kazayas, you have to bench. That would be like the obligation of her benching is based on 2 rabbinic laws, not based on 1. And therefore, she must be talking about this case where she ate an amount that she's satisfied with. And based on that, the rabbi said, you're obligated to bench. And so now she's obligated on a rabbinic level that the rabbi said that she's obligated to bench, but she did eat kadei svia. She ate enough for satisfaction, and that would make it that it's only 1 rabbinic obligation. If the women are obligated on a rabbinic level, it would be only 1 rabbinic law, and she could be fulfilling the obligation for her husband, who is obligated on a rabbinic level. If he only ate a kazayas, she could fulfill the obligation. But the rabbis said, Tovei me'era, a curse should come. That a curse should come if someone's wife and children, if they are benching for him, Kura should come to him. He really should not be. He shouldn't be letting himself just not be ignorant, and his children, his wife, they'll fulfill the mitzvahs for him, and he'll just answer amen. That's not the appropriate way to do things. Now comes the Gemara, and we're going to go further now. Amar Rava, we're in the bottom two words of the Gemara on page 38a. Amar Rava, Rava said. Next page. Hilchasa Gevirta or Gibarasa, many or big halachas, halachas gedolos, Rashi says. Big halachas ikal mishma mimen hagad halila. We could learn from the minhagim of Hallel that we're able to learn from the way the early people used to recite the early customs, what they used to do in the synagogues of previous times. Rashi says, "Masha noyagim." Okay, you know what? I just have to be back in 30 seconds. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so we're learning the big halachas gedolos. We could learn from the minhag of Hallel that what we see that's done in shul in our days, that even though we don't say it like they did in the early times, but we still could learn certain things. The main takana of reading Hallel. What does this mean? So let's see. Shehu. I'm sorry. Who Omer Hallelujah? He says Hallelujah, meaning the Shliach Tzibur, the Chazan. Vehein, and they, the community, Oimrim Hallelujah. They say afterwards Hallelujah, and the Shliach Tzibur waits until they finish saying Hallelujah. And Mikan Shemitzvah Lanais Hallelujah. From here, that we see that there's a mitzvah in the beginning of Hallel to say Hallelujah. In other words, even though let's say the Shliach Tzibur is being mitzi, the community, but nevertheless you still should say Hallelujah. Who Omer Hallelu Avdei Hashem? The Chazan says Hallelu Avdei Hashem. Vehein, and they Oimrim Hallelujah. They say Hallelujah, which is again Hallelujah, second Hallelujah. Mikan, from here we see that what? She'im Haya Gadol Makra Oisai Aina Achrav Halaluka. That if an adult is reciting the Hallel for you, so you should say after each sentence Hallelujah, and you don't have to recite the whole Hallel. If a person isn't able, let's say, to say Hallel, they could hear it from someone else and just say Hallelujah on each thing. So that's the second halacha. So again, the first halacha was that the shliach tzibur starts Hallelujah. You should also say Hallelujah. And even those that are not going to fulfill their obligation from the shliach tzibur, they should also say Hallelujah. The second halacha is that if someone can't say Hallel, he could fulfill his obligation by saying Hallelujah after the chazan says each thing. Hu Omer Hoidu Lashem. If the chazan, when the chazan says Hoidu Lashem ki tov kili olam chastoi, hey vehein Omerem Hoidu Lashem, and they say the chazan says Hoidu Lashem. Vehein Oimrim Hoidu Lashem, and they say after he finishes Hoidu Lashem, after he finishes, they say the Hoidu Lashem. Mikancha mitzvah lanis Rashi Prakim, you see that there is a mitzvah to say the beginning of a paragraph, and you don't say Hallelujah. So what this means is that you sort of switch the response when it comes to the beginning of a paragraph. So Itmar Nami, it was also stated this in the base medrash, like Rava said, Amrav Chanan bar Rava, mitzvah lanois Rashi Prakim. It's a mitzvah to give a response when you start the beginning of a chapter. Hu Aimer. So now comes the fourth halacha. Hu Aimer Ana Hashem Mashiach. So the shliach tzibur says on Hashem, and the community says on Hashem. Mikan she'im haya katan makra oisai oina achrav kol ma shehu oimer. From here we see that if a child is saying this Hallel, so you need to answer everything that he says, because the child is not obligated in Hallel. He can't be mitzi you. And we see that by the fact that for Ana Hashem Hashiana, the community has to say Ana Hashem Hashiana, even though it's not the beginning of a paragraph. And we see from here that this would mean that you would be obligated in reciting the whole Hallel if someone is not able to be mitzi you. What? How do we see this? Because the pasuk is divided in two, and when it's divided, it's one pasuk, and it's divided into two, and therefore this is similar to a child who's not obligated to recite a pasuk. It's like he's saying it. It's a little interesting how the Gemara understands that from here. That Hu Aimer Ana Hashem Ana, and it's not Rashi Prakim. So we see from here that there are times that, in other words, how do you exactly see it? You see that there are times that even something that's not the Rashi Prakim, you will need to say yourself. And that would, the example that would reply to would be um, uh, when a child is reciting the Hallel for adults, the adult would need to say each word. You see that from because there's an area of Hallel that everyone has to say it. So that shows that there's going to be times when a person is not able to fulfill their obligation with Shemea Koina. With hearing is considered as if you recited it. Now, the Meiri adds this other point. That is that because it's one pasuk and you're dividing it in two, so it's similar to like a katan reading, and that's how the Gemara understands that. You see from there that that it must be that this is teaching about a child saying Hallel. Well, how do you see that? Because the rabbis allowed a child that you're allowed to divide a pasuk into two. Normally, an adult is not supposed to cut a pasuk in half. And here, what are we doing? We're cutting the pasuk in half. Really, it's one pasuk. The fact that you're cutting it in half, so Miri, he adds a little understanding here that you see there. It's like similar to a child because for children, the Chacham understood that there's a heter, there's a leniency that you're allowed to stop in the middle in order to translate to the children when you're teaching them. Otherwise, they'll never learn because if you say a whole long pasuk and then you want to start translating it, they'll never know each word. So the rabbis understood that in order to teach, you can divide a pasuk in two in order to teach children. So here, this is an example from the minhagim of Hallel. We have an example. We have an understanding that there are going to be times like for example, this type of thing where you have a child reciting it. It would be you would have to say each word yourself because the child cannot be moitzi, cannot fulfill your obligation. So this is the fifth halacha, and then comes the next halacha. No, or that was the fourth. 1 second. That was the fourth halacha. Now comes the fifth halacha. Who aimer ana Hashem atzlichana, vehein aimer ana Hashem atzlichana. The shliach tzibur says, "I am ana Hashem. Please Hashem, save atzlichana. Please save us now." And they, of course, they listen to the shliach tzibur, and then they answer ana Hashem atzlichana, and Mikan she'imba lichvol kaifel. From here we see that if you come to double the psukim, kaifel, you can double them, even though you fulfilled your obligation already, because you already were yoitza when the chazan said "Ana Hashem atzlichana." You listened to the chazan, and nevertheless you're still saying "Ana Hashem atzlichana" again. So this teaches you that you could double a pasuk that's not doubled. It's interesting. We do it twice because we actually say "Ana Hashem atzlichana," "Ana Hashem atzlichana," but it seems in the olden days they didn't do that, and you see from the fact that we listen to the chazan and we double it, that shows that that you can double the psukim in Hallel. Hu aimer baruch, again, now we're up to the sixth halacha, that hu aimer baruch haba bein aimrim b'shem Hashem. The chazan says baruch haba, the community says b'shem Hashem, and they don't say baruch haba, and they don't say hallelujah, but rather they are yoitze with the chazans Baruch haba, and they just say Baruch b'shem Hashem. And so mikan l'shemea ka'ina. We see from here that if you listen to the chazan who's saying something, it's as if you said it, ka'ina. And as long as you have kavana to fulfill your obligation, even though you didn't say it, you are yoitza. There's a discussion here that what about if you know how to say everything? Would you still fulfill your obligation? Is it only for someone who doesn't know? Rashi over here says that Mikan nilmad l'she'ena yodeya. From here we learn to someone who doesn't know how to read and how to answer. If he hears something and he has kavana with his heart to listen, even though he didn't answer, he's yotzeh. And the same thing, the Mespalim B'tzibur, Shlich Tzibur says Kedusha, Yehesh Rabba, Yishtaku B'tfilasan, if a person is in the middle of Shemona Esrei, you could be quiet while you're davening and listen b'kavana b'harei hein koin. It's as if you answered to Kedusha. When they finish Kedusha, you go back to your davening. And this is the halacha of the Rav Yehuda Goyin, the Baal halachis kedolos. This is very interesting. Rashi adds in a very important halacha, and that is that if you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei, you're able to interrupt your Shemona Esrei, not to say anything, but to listen to the Chazan and fulfill your obligation of Kedusha. How do you listen? How do you fulfill your obligation of Kedusha? You have in mind what the Chazan is saying. You're Machavan Liboy. Where do you see that? From here. Mikan, from here you see, Shemea Koina, that if you listen, it's as if you said it, and it's good enough, you now heard Kedusha. Of course, this is a topic of debate. We learned about it in Brachas, that Tosfos argues. He says, what do you mean? If Shemea is Koina, if it's as if you said it, so then you've interrupted your Shemona Esrei. Tosfos understands it to be literal. Shemea Koina, if you listen to something, if you hear the Chazan saying something and you listen and have Kavana, let's say Kedusha, you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei, your own Amidah, and you listen to the Chazan, and you have in mind, I want to fulfill my obligation of Kedusha. So the halacha is Shemea Koina, right? It's as if you said it. So one way of understanding that is that's a great thing to do in the middle of Shemona Esrei. Now you can't talk, you can't say Kedusha, you can't say Kadosh, 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 you can't say Baruch Goyed Hashem. But you know what you could do? You listen, and you're fulfilling your mitzvah of being Kadosh Hashem, sanctifying Hashem's name, with the davening, with words, and so on, and you fulfilled that obligation. Tosfos says, actually, this is not correct, because again, Rashi brings from Rav Yehuda Goyin that's the Bahag, but we've seen Tosfos sometimes argues on the Bahag, and Tosfos says that you can't do such a thing because Shemea is Koina literally. It's as if you actually said Kedusha. Now, are you allowed to say Kedusha in the middle of Shemona Esrei? No. At the end of Shemona Esrei, there's an area where, the last paragraph, where you could say Kedusha. You could say the Kadosh, 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 Baruch Hashem Kaimai, Yimlech Hashem Li'olam, Kel Kadosh, you could answer Amen to, but Shemet Tefillah, you could answer Amen to. Like there is a paragraph at the end, but in the middle of Shemona Esrei, you're not allowed to interrupt. And if you listen and have kavana to be for the Kedusha, you are actually saying Kedusha, and that's interrupting your Shemona Esrei, so you're not allowed to do that. So this is an argument, Rashi and Tosfos, or Tosfos and Rav Yehuda Goyin. The halacha actually follows Rashi, at least I'm not familiar what the Sephardic tradition is, but if I'm not mistaken, the halacha for Ashkenaz is that you actually listen to the Chazan in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and you don't say anything. You have in mind, and you're yotzeh the Kedusha. Okay, now comes the next Gemara. Bo Minei, they asked, basically means the student scholars. Bo Minei, they asked from Reb Chia Bar Abba, Shama, if you heard from a bracha from someone else, but you did not answer, like you didn't say Amen. Mahu, what's the din? If Shemea is Koina, do you need to say Amen? It's as if you said it. What happens if you didn't say Amen? So Amar Lahu, Rav Barabba said, Chakimaya, the scholars, the Safraya, and the teachers, Reishi Amon, the leaders of the people, Vidarshaya, the Darshanim, Amru, they all said, Shama v'loyana yatsa. That if a person heard, he didn't answer, you fulfill your obligation because of Shemeya Ka'ina. If you hear something, it's as if you said it. We also discussed a while back, tractate brachas, about saying brachas HaTorah when you listen to someone. Shemeya Ka'ina. It's as if you're saying it. So would that be considered? So it would seem that you would need to say brachas. If the person woke up in the morning, wanted to listen to a shir. If it's is it considered like he's saying? If it's considered like he's saying divrei Torah, so there's a discussion about mahar, thinking about divrei Torah, but speaking it. So would this be called speaking it because you're not just thinking, you're listening to someone else who's giving the shir? Would that be considered shemeh koina? If I remember correctly, we said you definitely should try to say brachas before brachas HaTorah, blessing on the Torah before, because seemingly this would be applicable shemeh koina. Then of course comes the question: what about listening to a video? Does that apply? You're listening to a recording. You're not listening to an actual shemeh koina. It's only a recording. But in any event, obviously people try to say brachas before even thinking, before learning Torah. But anyway, this is the discussion here of shemeya is ka'ina, even if you don't say amen on brachas or on other things, maybe halal, you didn't say halaluka, but you have it in the mind, shemeya is ka'ina. Itmar nami, it was also stated, Amar Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Reb Shimon ben Levi, Mishum bar Kapara, Minayin, l'shemei ka'ina, how do you know? Because it says, Ace, Kol divrei ha-sefer, asher karo melech Yehuda, all the words of the Sefer Torah that Yoshio read, the king of Yehuda. V'chi Yoshio Quran, v'alei Shavan Quran. Did the king really say it? Yoshio really Shafan the Sefer. Quran he read it. The Chsiv v'yikra Eyu Shafan l'fnei Hamelech. Shafan really read Ela mikan l'shemeh koina. We see over there that it's considered as if the king read it because Shemeya Koina, because when you listen, it's as if you are reciting it. So basically, they found the Sefer Torah and they read it, and this is proof that Shemeya, when you hear something, it's as if you fulfilled your obligation. It's as if you read it and said it. But Dilma, the Gemara asks, maybe Basad the Kra'anu Shafan Kara Yoshio, maybe Yoshio did read it, and it was a Sefer Torah they found. It was opened up to the Teichacha, and so the Gemara says maybe Yoshio actually went and read it himself. And how do you know Shemeas Koina? Maybe the pasuk says that Shafan read it, but maybe Yeshio also read it. So don't let it go up in your mind to say such a thing. Because it says Yan Rach Levavcha Vatikona Ibnei Hashem B'Shamacha. Because your heart is soft and it has humbled it, you have humbled it before Hashem, Ibnei Hashem. B'Shamacha, when you heard those words, it says B'Shamacha v'lei b'kra'acha. When you heard those words and you were humbled, so we learn from there that he didn't actually say it. He heard the shafan say it, and he was fulfilling this mitzvah. Okay, at least he was listening, and we understand from there that shemeya is ka'ina. Amar Rava. So Rava says that loy lema inash, a person shouldn't say Baruch haba. Start the pasuk of Baruch haba, and the person shouldn't say if there's no one that's reading to him. In other words, he's saying it himself. You shouldn't say Baruch haba and take a breath in between, and then say B'Shem Hashem. Baruch haba, Hadar B'Shem Hashem, and then say B'Shem Hashem, because in such a way, it seems like you're saying Hashem's name separate from Baruch haba. And it's as if you're saying Hashem's name in vain. Ella, rather, Baruch haba b'shem Hashem bahadadi. You should make sure to say it close to each other. So Rav Safra, Moshe Shaper Kamret. Now he uses the term Moshe by saying, Moshe, you great leader. It's calling Rava. That Rav Safra is telling Rava, Moshe, you Shaber Kamret. Ela Hasam v'Hacha Suke Milsahi v'Leis Lanba. You know, it's there's a question if this belongs here or not. So we'll just skip it and have it in a minute. V'Amar Rava Loilema Inish. Rava says a person shouldn't say Yeheshmei Rabba v'Hadar Mevarach. Person shouldn't say Yeheshmei Rabba and then say Mevarach. Ella, and I was take a breath. Yeheshmei Rabba, take a breath and stop, and then say Mevarach. Ella Yeheshmei Rabba Mevarach Bahadadi. A person should make sure to say Yeheshmei Rabba Mevarach together. You shouldn't look like you're using. It shouldn't look like you're. Well, it should be like separating. Amen Yeheshmei Rabba is praise, and it's a great praise, and it says the whole world exists from the Amen Yeheshmei Rabba, and therefore, if you interrupt it, it's similar to being mafsik with Hashem's name. So basically, a person shouldn't interrupt Amen Yeheshmei Rabba and Mevarach. Hashem's great name should be blessed. It's such a powerful prayer that the whole world says stands on such a prayer, on such the Yeheshmei Rabba. Different statements in the Gemara talks about it could destroy, you could rip up, tear up a decree, a 70-year decree. So it's a very powerful statement, great honor to Hashem, and the whole world stands on this statement. So you should make sure not to interrupt that type of statement. Amalei Rav Safra Moshe, and here comes that statement. Moshe Shaber Ka'amrit. Moshe, you great man like Moshe, you said great. Ella, but Hasam there by Baruch Haba v'Hacha. I mean, Yishrabba Suke Milsahu v'Leslan Ba. He says the earlier law of Baruch Haba, and here the law of Yeheshmei Rabba, it's the Asuke Milsahu. It's the end of the sentence. V'Leslan Ba. There's no problem. It's not considered a stop. You see that it's a continuation, and if you interrupt with a breath, it's not a problem. Well, what's the big deal? So actually, the understanding, Rashi says Shaper Ka'amrit is like a question. Did you think you said such a great thing? It's not a problem. Asuke Milsi, you're just finishing the sentence. You're not allowed to breathe in the middle. You have to. It's almost like the Aseres B'nai Haman. You have to say it in one breath. Here, you can't interrupt. You can't stop. All right, we're gonna stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Rabbi, who did
Yes.
you say? Who's Shafat?
Shaphan is, we're going to learn about him in the Book of Kings. We're going to have that story coming up. It's right after Chizkiah, we're going to have Yoshio. But
But
he
who was he?
was the cipher.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, sei gesund, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.